Chapter 609. Vermouth Lionheart 1. This was a place incapable of hosting anything. Hence, becoming aware of one's self-existence or one's own ego was impossible, as was staying conscious. It was akin to a trash heap where madness and filth had accumulated over an immeasurable expanse of time. The belly of destruction was a place incapable of existence, and nothing should have been able to originate from the emptiness that filled it. Thus, the emergence of an existence was nothing short of a miracle. Long ago Vermouth was born here. He knew neither the name Vermouth Lionheart nor did he possess any real personality after his birth. His existence was profoundly alien even in the belly of destruction, but the mindless demon king of destruction did not recognize the being born within itself. In fact, it wasn't even capable of becoming aware of the foreign body. All manner of things were teeming within destruction's belly, and a newborn incapable of even squirming was no different from any other cell. For a long time, Vermouth lay crouching in the belly. Although it was his birthplace, he never once felt it as comforting or cradling like a mother's womb. He was defined merely as a cell and was composed of destruction's dark power. Yet strangely, as more time passed, he felt increasingly more discomfort the more he became aware of his sense of self. Who am I? Why was I born here? And what exactly is this place? At some point he began to harbor such questions. And after much contemplation he realized the answer. A large scar could be found in a place where nothing should exist. It was a deep wound that, despite the passage of time, never healed. As he grew increasingly aware, everything in the belly became increasingly torturous for him, but strangely he did not feel any pain in the scar. Instead he felt a sense of comfort and longing there. Becoming aware of this scar awakened his existence. Despite previously having no feelings and only questions, he now possessed a clear personality. Once he found himself conscious, memories began to seep into his mind. Who was responsible for this scar? Agaroth. Vermouth distinctly remembered the name in the darkness. He was born from the scar inflicted on destruction. Though he was a miraculous existence born from a scar caused by the divine sword, Vermouth found it impossible to affirm his own existence. Moreover, even if he was born from a miracle, the fact that he was a copy of destruction did not change. The critical difference between Vermouth and the demon king of destruction was the presence of reason and recognition of self. He had awakened memories by coming to self-realization, and he knew the history that destruction had lived through as well as the name Vermouth Lionheart. Unlike the demon king of destruction who existed solely to bring about destruction, Vermouth, in this repulsively revolting belly, contemplated who he was, what he should do and what he could do. He could have lived as a mere extension of destruction. Doing nothing would have been fine, but Vermouth could not accept that. It was because his existence began with a miracle. There was a faint light in the very first of his reawakened memories. There was a dying ember. There was a man who, after leaving a scar on destruction, slumped down and opted to curse rather than despair. The man died harboring nothing but a will to kill despite facing his death and the eventual ruin of the world. Then there was a man who, consumed by desire, betrayed others and ultimately was devoured by his cravings. He was a man who left behind only despicable regret. He was overwhelmed with regret and guilt, thinking that he would have made a different choice had he only known better. That man, swept away and consumed by his regrets, was none other than Vermouth Lionheart. Thus, Vermouth emerged into the world to continue the miracle that had given rise to his existence and to lead a life different from the old Vermouth, who died with ugly regrets. Because he had felt the man who had died cursing and harboring murderous intent had been born into this world. How much time had passed since Agaroth's death was unclear, but Vermouth was certain that Agaroth had reincarnated into this world. And since Vermouth was born from the miraculous scar Agaroth had left behind, he felt a fateful connection with this man. I am. In the midst of damp, sticky darkness, Vermouth spoke, a clone of destruction. He was born from a miracle, yet ultimately was a part of destruction. Perhaps he was the reason everything went awry. After all, he had been born and interfered with fate. If only I had not been born. If only I had not pretended to be the hero. Perhaps everything would have proceeded smoothly. Vermouth had questioned himself hundreds, thousands of times over 300 years. He wondered if all that he had experienced as the hero should have been Hamel's instead. He continuously pondered why he had no choice but to step forward. He was strong. He knew about the demon king of destruction. He could negotiate with the Demon King of Incarceration. Though he couldn't help in defeating the Demon King of Destruction, he could contribute greatly to killing the other Demon Kings. Hamel was still weak. He had not awakened his divinity. He may be making a name for himself in the mercenary world, but with his strength, Hamel wouldn't survive a fight with the demons. The world needed a hero. Vermouth had no choice but to take the holy sword and become the hero. That was how the world would find hope. He needed companions to fight the Demon Kings and who could also support Hamel. So he had been left with no other choice. But those were all excuses. Vermouth knew what he truly longed for, the desire he had long kept buried deep inside. The original Vermouth Lionheart didn't just want to be the hero's companion. He wanted to be the hero himself. Born from a miracle, Vermouth Lionheart wanted to save the world with Hamel. I was just a piece of destruction doomed to die. Vermouth placed his hand over his chest. He could feel the faint beating of his heart. I was neither the hero nor a human. The beating of his heart quickened. A flame sparked in his chest, spread and transformed into a brilliant star. You simply called me Vermouth. The bright white flame illuminated the darkness. His murky eyes were starting to fill with a brilliant light. This place was no longer dark. Vermouth looked around with his shining golden eyes. Thump, thump, thump. The steady, loud beats came not from Vermouth's heart but from the heart of destruction that he had assimilated with. Vermouth took a deep breath and reached out his hand. Thump, 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 thump. The beating of the heart grew stronger. He could see the outside beyond the dimming darkness. His companions stood in front of the monster. All of them were covered in blood and wounds, yet no one had fallen. Despite the slim chances of victory, there was no sign of despair on their faces. Vermouth knew all too well the look in those eyes. How many times had they crossed the line of death with such a gaze? Vermouth reached further ahead while gasping for breath. Thump, 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 thump. As Vermouth moved, the beating of the heart grew stronger, but a grating dissonance accompanied it, indicating his movements were adversely affecting the monster and its heart. Where I belong is. Hamel, Anise, Sienna and Molen had said it. They called him to fight together. The young saint, who had never spoken directly with Vermouth, prayed for him. Vermouth recognized the look in the eyes of the young saint, who resembled Anise. To Vermouth, such gazes had once been very familiar. He had seen such gazes daily. Such were the eyes of one beholding the hero. They were eyes filled with hope, filled with belief that he would save the world. This isn't the place, Vermouth said as he bit his lip and moved forward. The dense dark power in the heart clashed with Vermouth's flame. The dark power of destruction turned to ash under the scorch of Vermouth's flame, but his fire did not dim. He clearly knew that he was Vermouth Lionheart, and his belief caused his flame to be unwavering. He had made a declaration that he did not belong in this place, and his words created ripples inside the heart. He stepped forward and grasped something. It was an ancient chain that had been bound to destruction in the distant past. Do you still wish to die with destruction? A faint voice came through the chain. No, Vermouth said as he smiled faintly and shook his head. He understood the intent behind the question. The original hero and the Demon King, who had always tested the world and despaired repeatedly, was not laying a trial of despair with his question now. The Demon King of Incarceration, who had lived an eternity of despair, was now seeking hope. I wish to destroy destruction with everyone, Vermouth declared. Ha ha. The Demon King of Incarceration let out a short laugh and said, Then pull out the chain, Vermouth Lionheart. Vermouth wrapped his hand around the chain. With a crunching sound, he pulled out the chain from the depths of destruction's heart, and the chain wobbled in the darkness. The chain then coiled around Vermouth's arm, but he was unperturbed and made no effort to prevent it from doing so. Crack, crack. The chain began to burrow into his arm after twisting around it, but he could feel no pain. What do you need? The voice of the Demon King of Incarceration echoed in his head. A sword, Vermouth answered without hesitation. As he spoke, a sword appeared in Vermouth's hand. The chain that had once bound the heart from the beginning had become a sword for Vermouth. He gripped the sword with both hands. The flames Vermouth conjured clashed with the dark power of destruction, and the sword born from the chain did not succumb to the heart's power. Ha ha. Vermouth couldn't help but laugh at the feel of the sword in his hands. It feels nice. How long had it been since he had wielded a sword to fight, to kill a demon king? Vermouth felt more alive in himself as he held the sword in his hand. Knowing that he was a piece of destruction felt horrific and excruciating. But now, holding a sword to kill the Demon King, whoosh. The sword split the darkness. Like on ancient battlefields centuries ago, he kept swinging. The more he swung, the more the flames spread. The sound emanating from the heart was now closer to creaking screams than rhythmic beats. It opened. Rumble. A small wound opened and vermouth was spat out along with currents of dark power. The engulfing currents not only shook Vermouth's spirit but also threatened to deeply erode it. The impulses and madness that had visited him thousands of times over the past 300 years battered at his reason. But he wouldn't let it erode him. Vermouth glared beyond the darkness with his golden eyes. He listened to the beating of his own heart. He felt the heat of the blood pumping from it. The great Vermouth. A voice came from afar. It caused him to grasp onto his consciousness even stronger. The insidious impulses and madness that tried to erode him were pushed back. The great Vermouth. The voice came again. The great Vermouth. In the midst of the turmoil, Vermouth found himself laughing. All his life, Vermouth had never liked the name the Great Vermouth. He had read the fairy tale. He naturally guessed who had written it, Sienna and Anise. Therefore he couldn't possibly like the fairy tale and the name the Great Vermouth. He had made promises but only to himself. He hadn't said a word to his companions who begged him to explain. After returning to Kiel, he received a duchy and married a woman chosen among many candidates for her likelihood of producing many children. After the war, Vermouth Lionheart's life was never great. After a loveless marriage, he lived only to fulfill his responsibilities towards the Lionheart family and to help it flourish. He even severed ties with his comrades. To him, the title of the Great Vermouth seemed like cruel mockery. He never asked Sienna and Anise what they were thinking when they wrote the book, but he had his suspicions. There was a possibility, or rather it was almost certain, that the name Great Vermouth was a nasty joke. He wasn't someone who could ever be called great. He wasn't the hero, nor was he even human. Why didn't I think of it? Vermouth chuckled as he raised his sword. That you would never mean it that way. The Great Vermouth. The voice came again. There was not a hint of mockery in that voice. It wasn't his comrades calling him. The voice came from outside the belly. Many people were shouting that name. The Great Vermouth, he said helplessly. The monster's chest split open. Honestly, it's quite embarrassing. Vermouth smiled wryly as he fell. Chapter 610, Vermouth Lionheart 2. The monster had been blasting dark power in all directions as if it had been gripped by a fit of frenzy. Then suddenly, it trembled before stopping in its place. Eugene knew that something must have happened to the monster, but at the same time he was taken aback when it suddenly stopped. Molen quickly turned towards Eugene while catching his breath, waiting for instructions on whether to continue his attack. Wait, said Eugene. The monster's pause was an opportunity. Yet something was off. The monster had been behaving oddly for a while, but now Eugene felt strange. It was somehow related to the pounding of the monster's heart. Vermouth, Eugene muttered without realizing it. Whoosh. As if responding to the call, the monster's belly split open. Dark power and color poured out like blood, and the monster's countless legs flailed before their joints buckled. Woo! A scream erupted from the monster's gaping mouth. However, the cascade of dark power and swirling color didn't pool or spread but vanished where it fell. To be precise, it turned to ash. Within the dense waterfall of dark power and color was a distinct flame and light. And at the center of the burning light and flame shone a golden hue. Vermouth! Sienna exclaimed in surprise. Molen did not wait for Eugene's command this time. He charged forward and Eugene did the same. Sienna's magic was sucked into the monster's maw and exploded. The successive green flames threw the monster's head back. Molen chopped off the monster's legs with his axe, clearing the path for Eugene, who rushed forward. Inside the maelstrom, Eugene saw Vermouth. The golden eyes were shining through, though they were different from the eyes of Vermouth Eugene had known since his reincarnation. When he first saw Vermouth after reincarnating, his eyes were always murky, dulled by centuries of madness. But now they shone as if from 300 years ago, like when they had first fought together against the Demon Kings, like when they had traversed the Devildom together. They were shining just like when they first met, and Vermouth asked him to be his comrade. Eugene found himself stretching out his hand towards Vermouth. Vermouth saw the hand reaching toward him. 300 years ago, when Hamel had first met him and lost in a duel, Vermouth had reached out his hand in accordance with Hamel's promise to become comrades. Now, Vermouth said with a faint smile, you continue to reach out your hand to me so many times. Now no promise was needed. Vermouth grasped Eugene's hand. With a fierce pull, Vermouth emerged from the maelstrom. You're not going back in after coming this far, are you? Eugene asked with a smirk. Vermouth proudly raised his sword in response. Though it was completely different in form, Eugene could feel the chains of the Demon King of Incarceration in that sword. Eugene didn't ask if Vermouth could fight. Instead, he yanked Vermouth back with a strong pull and tossed him backward while he stayed under the monster's split belly. He saw the wide gash in the monster's belly. There were no organs inside, but Eugene could sense the heart through the wound. It was still throbbing irregularly but with power. Eugene held his breath while conjuring divine fire. Whoosh! The will of light inhabited Eugene's divine fire. A long spear materialized in his hand and he threw it toward the monster's gut. Crackle! The spear was sucked straight into the monster's belly. It cleaved through the dispersing dark power and color and pierced the monster's body. Vermouth! Molen called as he leaped to catch Vermouth when he saw Vermouth flying towards him. He intended to support Vermouth since he had just been inside the monster. Moreover, he knew Vermouth had not been in great condition. But as Molen and Vermouth's gazes met mid-air, Molen realized that Vermouth didn't need any support right now. With a grin, Molen hefted his remaining right hand to raise his axe. Vermouth turned his body mid-air and used Molen's axe as a foothold. Whoosh! The axe cut through the air and Vermouth was propelled even higher. Thus, Vermouth quickly ascended above the monster's head. The monster was drenched in Sienna's magic and penetrated by the spear of divine flames. It was still struggling to maintain its posture. With a flash of fury in his golden eyes, Vermouth swung his sword with his right hand. Flash! His attack seemed to split the void and it decapitated the monster. Dark power and color spurted out like a fountain from the stump of its head, but before it could even hit the ground, Vermouth swung several more times and shattered the monster's head into pieces. Seems like you were quite comfortable inside the stomach. You're doing much better now, Sienna giggled as she flew to join Vermouth. I've heard you all asking to fight together several times. I couldn't just sit back and watch after all that, responded Vermouth. Hey, it's good to be enthusiastic, but don't overdo it. Right now, you are much weaker than us. Sienna abruptly paused, choking on her words. Hadn't Vermouth just sliced off the monster's head? Despite the monster's inability to steady itself, how much had Sienna and Molen struggled to destroy its robust body? Why are you so strong? Sienna asked with narrowed eyes. A child's violence is very fatal to their parents, Vermouth answered. Sienna had never imagined such a response from Vermouth. She stammered for a moment, then finally managed to ask, "Are you joking?" "No," Vermouth chuckled while shaking his head. "I don't consider that thing a parent, but I was indeed born from it." Eugene, Molen, and Sienna's powers were nullified by the monster's dark power. The more they attacked, the quicker their strength waned. But Vermouth's strikes could effortlessly slice through destruction's dark power while wasting no energy. But that's as far as it goes. I can't match your finesse. And, ending destruction with my own hands will be impossible, continued Vermouth. The stump of its head bubbled and boiled. The spear that had penetrated the monster's body also disintegrated. No more dark power and color poured from the monster's belly, and its limbs straightened. The monster rose up. Now is the moment, everyone thought this. Now they could defeat the monster. Now they could destroy the heart of destruction. Eugene was certain as he returned to his comrade's side. He targeted the monster with his divinity of victory. Although the path to victory wasn't easy, the win, once invisible, now glimmered faintly in sight. Ah! Dozens of heads blossomed from the boiling stump of the monster's head. The monster opened its dozens of mouths wide, and the void thundered as dark power seethed within its maws. Eugene felt a tingling on his skin and instinctively stepped back. This is its death throes, Eugene observed while facing the intense wave of dark power head-on. The creature released all of its dark power, and the waves of darkness engulfed its body. This was no longer merely a monster. It had truly become an embodiment of destruction. As Eugene watched the dizzyingly entwined colors, Vermouth approached him. You shatter its heart, said Vermouth. And you? Eugene asked. I'll go with you, though I'm not sure if that will satisfy you right now, responded Vermouth. Vermouth was asking him to conserve his energy. Eugene snorted and nodded. Thud thud thud. The vibration from outside shook the void. Attacks were being launched at the Demon King of Destruction from outside as well. Do you hear it? Eugene asked. Vermouth closed his eyes for a moment to feel the vibration before responding. Even if I didn't want to, I'd have no choice but to hear it. The great Vermouth. We will return together this time, Eugene declared. Thump. Eugene patted Vermouth's shoulder before picking up his divine sword. Vermouth shivered and nodded. The monster's dozens of heads turned towards them, mouths gaping. Beams of dark power and color shot forth, engulfing everything in their paths. Anise and Christina began to chant prayers. Sienna extended Mary and unleashed her magic. With a roar, the miracle-infused barrier blocked the onslaught of destruction. But the strain it endured was no light matter. Sienna swallowed back the blood in her mouth and bit her lip. There's only so many times you can block it. The voice of the sage was heard coming from Mary. The power of the Demon King of Destruction could easily obliterate the world. Even if Sienna sat on the divine throne of magic, she couldn't block such attacks repeatedly. I must block it somehow, Sienna thought desperately. The hero would take the life of the Demon King. Sienna understood her role. Her task was to aid the hero's sword in defeating the Demon King, for which the sword was forged. With the sage's whisper, Mary shone brilliantly. The withering vines and petals unfurled once more. Startled by the power transmitted to her from Mary, Sienna jumped slightly. You should have handed it over earlier. Sienna complained to the sage in her mind. There is only significance in delivering it at the moment it is most needed. Promise me, my successor. I will not awaken for a long time. I won't be able to see you in Agaroth and destruction. The sage, Vischer Lavula, had become the world tree to continue the world from destruction. I trust in Agaroth. I trust in you, the darling of magic. I trust in all those with you. So, I believe that I will be able to awaken once more and go to sleep. The sage had given up on witnessing what she had longed for all her life. Yet the sage harbored no fear about a future she would not see. Then, said Sienna. Mary felt incredibly heavy in her hands. The world tree's life force was filling Mary to the brim. My children will welcome you then, she declared. Mary emitted light. The barrier opened and beams of light shot forth, extinguishing destruction's dark power and forging a path straight ahead. Dozens of the monster's heads were swept away by the light in the midst of spewing dark power and swirling color. Sienna felt her legs give out under her but forced herself to step forward. It was too early to fall. Agaroth, the sage said. A light burst from behind, but Eugene did not look back. Sienna and the world tree had opened a path for him, and Eugene was the first to leap down that path. No, that's an old name, the sage continued. In the lasting path of light he felt the forest. Spirits of the world tree which could not exist here, pushed on Eugene's back, and someone caught his hand from the front and pulled it. Goodbye, Eugene Lionheart, the sage said with a brilliant smile. He saw the fading figure of the sage. She did not wear the lonely smile she had when she first saw Eugene. Although she hadn't forgotten the man named Agaroth, she no longer held any lingering feelings for him. Her hopes for the future outweighed her unresolved past regrets. A lonely smile did not suit the future she envisioned. Sleep well, Vischer, Eugene responded with a smile of his own. Satisfied by this smile and farewell, Vischer laughed heartily as her image receded. Her heart resounded with laughter. The light had wished for the same conclusion but had made different choices when faced with destruction. The light disappeared while calling the name of an old friend who had fallen asleep long ago. But there was no need for mourning. The sage had merely entered a long slumber. If there existed a future unseen by the gods of the past, they could meet once again. I know, Eugene said aloud. He placed a hand on his chest. His fingers dug into his chest. Perhaps. No, definitely. Eugene clung to the universe in his heart with such a thought. This would be his last ignition. Either he died or he killed destruction. Having lost dozens of heads, the monster staggered as it flailed its limbs. Molin screamed and rushed forward first. He slashed through all the attacks that were aimed at Sienna and Eugene. Vermouth was not idle either. It took mere seconds for Eugene's ignition to activate. It was routine for Vermouth and Molen to fend off attacks during that time. Thump. A loud sound resonated. It was a sound different from the rumble emanating from the outside and distinct from the one echoing from the heart of destruction. It was a sound that signified determination. The end would come in some form or another. This was a deadly but powerful technique that brought about the end of a battle, albeit at a great cost. But it was ultimately destructive to the body, and Vermouth harbored no affection for ignition. But one thing was undeniable. Eugene and Hamel had never lost after using ignition. He always used ignition to secure victory against high demons and demon kings. He had even forced Gavid to retreat 300, despite the insurmountable gap in power between them. Even with a broken body, he used ignition to slay the shield and staff of incarceration, even though Hamel himself died in the end. "This time I won't die," Eugene declared. Of course he had no intention of dying. Chapter 6:11, Vermouth Lionheart 3, It Feels Distant. Vermouth couldn't help but think so despite being right beside Eugene. The flames, born from the white flame formula, had become something entirely different now. Those clear, intense flames were indeed the divine flames that affirmed Ogoroth, Hamel Dynas and Eugene Lionheart. Vermouth looked sideways at Eugene while shuddering. Eugene's eyes blazed like flames as he glared at destruction. He sensed Vermouth's gaze and turned his head towards him. "What's up, you bastard?" Eugene asked with a chuckle. "Think you can do better than now?" Vermouth blinked several times, taken aback by the sudden question. He couldn't comprehend Eugene's words at first, but soon he recalled something he had said long ago and let out a curt laugh. "I was wondering what you were on about. Did my words hurt you that much?" Vermouth asked. "Usually the one who does the beating doesn't remember. It's the one who gets hit that remembers." "Because it hurts," answered Eugene. "I said it for your sake," said Vermouth. Thinking about it now, there were reasons for those words. But Hamel could not have guessed them at the time. So Eugene scoffed and joked. "For me, huh? Fucking hell. Out of nowhere you smack me on the back of the head then say do better, bastard." "I thought that kind of advice was right for you," responded Vermouth. Now it was Eugene's turn to blink dazedly. Indeed, hearing those words at the time had been incredibly infuriating, but it was those words that drove him to push himself to the limit. But was it truly thanks to Vermouth? Wasn't it Hamel who decided he would one day get back at the bastard for hitting the back of his head? He was the one who had become determined to one day beat that bastard. "Let's go," Eugene said without a retort. Of course, voicing such opposing thoughts would only cheapen the moment, and Eugene knew this well. Thus he put on a serious expression and glared at destruction. Seeing that determined profile, Vermouth unwittingly smirked. He was simply pleased being able to exchange such trivial banter with his comrade. "I'll go first," said Vermouth. He patted Molen on the shoulder and moved ahead, glancing back at Eugene saying, "With how you are now, even if I go ahead, you can catch up to me in no time." Molen laughed heartily at that. Then the three of them laughed together in front of the fearsome power of destruction. Molen stomped the ground and surged forward, laying his axe flat. Destruction's numerous arms and bursts of dark power immediately flew toward Molen. But there was no need for him to swing his axe. Sienna had cast a spell. A thick beam of light obliterated Destruction's arms and dark power. Thanks to her swift response, Molen reached the body of Destruction without needing to swing his axe. Crack! He swung his axe immediately after, cutting through Destruction's thick legs. It was as if he were slicing through a giant tree in one fell swoop. Molen spun around amidst the swirling dark power and color. The following strikes sliced off more of Destruction's legs. Vermouth moved too. He crossed the space in an instant and reached the heads of Destruction. While his sword could easily sever Destruction's neck without resistance, slicing its heads tens or even hundreds of times would not kill it. The weakened heart. Vermouth and Eugene shared the same thought. However, targeting the heart didn't mean they could easily reach it and destroy it. They had failed once already. The spear forged from divine fire had perfectly penetrated the body of Destruction but failed to reach the heart. Even if Vermouth had torn it open and weakened it while exiting from the body of Destruction, the sinister and ferocious waves of dark power were still fiercely guarding the heart. There was no other way forward. They had to keep slicing. They needed to continue cutting through the thick curtains of dark power before they could drive the divine sword into Destruction's guarded heart. It wasn't far now. Eugene could feel that their victory was imminent. The heart had seemed unreachable before, but after Vermouth's emergence, it was now within reach. But Destruction's end wasn't the only thing that was near. They were inside the belly of destruction. Waging a prolonged battle here was an impossible feat from the start. If it were merely about holding on, they could last a long time, but they burnt through their energy at an alarming pace as they gave it their all against destruction. Sienna was already at her limit. Although she forcibly held herself up and continued to cast spells, it wouldn't be strange if she collapsed at any moment. Not yet, Sienna gasped, feeling dizzy and tasting blood in her mouth. She felt hollow inside. Her grip on Mary felt numb. And Mary was heavy. For a wizard, to feel their staff heavy was a truly dangerous sign. But Sienna didn't stop. She had already felt the weight of the staff hundreds of years ago. Was this the worst she had ever been? Oh. Sienna chewed on her lip and forced her hands to move Mary. The sage's voice no longer reached her. The soul power she had received from the World Tree was fading, and the dark power she had received from Noir, along with her own mana, was nearly depleted. But this was not the worst yet, Sienna thought again. This was not a dire situation. It was a challenge that could be overcome. Although her strength was exhausted and her body slow and heavy, her mind was clear. Her thoughts were infinitely expanding. Suddenly there was no dizziness in her head. Rumbly. With a roar, the magic Sienna released rained down from above destruction. Thousands of arms sprouted from destruction's back and resisted the magical downpour. But the magic infused into its limbs and caused explosion after explosion within destruction's body. Sienna coughed up blood and staggered as she barely managed to raise her head. Her vision blurred a bit more. But despite the blurring and shaking, the flames were still distinct. "It's okay," Sienna said assuringly. She shook her head and smiled. She could sense Anise and Christina trying to approach her. Even if they wanted to heal her, her injuries weren't the kind that could be treated. Moreover, the saints were just as strained as her. They were already overwhelmed with just fine-tuning the divine energy that Eugene had unleashed. "I wish I could watch more, help more," said Sienna. She didn't want to collapse yet, but it seemed she had no choice now. "I know," Sienna said as she smiled faintly and looked ahead. She saw flames that seemed capable of burning everything. Yet it was also brilliant and seemed capable of illuminating everything. Although Eugene had stepped forward later than Vermouth and Molin, he was already standing beside Vermouth, severing the head of destruction. "I know well," Sienna said as if to herself. She saw the flames merge. First, Vermouth struck, and Eugene hammered divine fire into the path Vermouth opened. Sometimes Eugene struck first and Vermouth covered him. Sienna knew them too well. She had always watched their backs. He knew. She knew that with Eugene and Vermouth as they were now, they could do it. Hadn't it always been so? Even against an enemy that seemed utterly invincible, even if it were a demon king, if Hamel and Vermouth fought together, they could win. It would be the same now. Although Sienna's divinity was not of victory, she was as sure of victory as Eugene. Therefore she gathered all the remaining mana and gathered it into Mary. This was the last spell she could use in this battle. Sienna raised Mary high above her head. She slowly knelt down and brought Mary down. With a thud, Mary stood upright on the ground. Vines wrapped around the staff started cascading down and petals started to fall. Things that shouldn't exist here were born. Things that could be called symbols of life, grass, flowers, trees, began to sprout around Sienna. A forest was instantly born in the belly of destruction, where only a void existed. This was magic that even the wizard Sienna Meridian could never have wielded. Yet, it was a miracle that only she could perform, coloring the belly of destruction not with ominous shades but with the colors of life. "Bloom." Sienna's voice was faint, but it was filled with determination. Her command activated the magic. Whoosh. Countless buds and the flowers of trees blossomed. Sienna closed her blurry eyes as she felt the fragrance fill the air. Boom. All of destruction's legs buckled amid abundant life. Molin took a step back as destruction collapsed, but he did not glance back. This magic was a miracle wrought by Sienna. All the flowers and plants were swallowing destruction's dark power and wilting in the process. This was her last spell. Sienna could no longer cast magic, nor could she fight. "It's not enough," Molin said with a wry chuckle to himself. His end wasn't far off either. A severed arm wasn't the issue. Being exposed at the forefront to destruction's toxic power was what afflicted Molan. He had given his all. He had been desperate. But had he fought enough to satisfy himself? He questioned before laughing heartily. He had split open destruction's wound and cleared the path to the core. That was all. He hadn't managed to destroy the heart. He didn't consider cutting off destruction's limbs several times a significant feat. Up above, Hamel and Vermouth were fighting together. What can I do now? Molan wondered, then stopped. That was the wrong thing to ask. What should I do? Molan thought instead. He recalled what he had done in battles fought alongside his comrades. Molan always took the lead. While he attacked when there were opportunities, his primary role was to receive attacks. Hamel and Vermouth were free to focus solely on attacking because Molan could take the hits. To be attacked meant to immobilize the enemy, to render them incapable of movement. His role was to make it easier for Hamel and Vermouth to engage in combat. He understood. Molan put on a bright smile while lifting his axe. Crack. He severed the rotting legs of destruction. Normally they would have regenerated instantly, but now the process was noticeably slower. Thus, Molan could proceed with his intended task. He summoned all the strength he could muster, all the force he could draw from within himself. The concentrated power caused Molan's entire body to glow red and tremble. The force was so intense it even shattered the axe in his grip. It didn't matter. Right now he had no need for an axe to sever. The divine fire responded to his will as it formed an axe. The divine power he had drawn forth as Eugene's incarnation enveloped Molan. Boom. Molan's foot stamped the ground. He looked up, his eyes meeting those of Eugene and Vermouth as they beheaded destruction. Molan grinned at them. I am. Molan had done what he needed to do. He would fulfill his duty with the one arm he had left. Though it would have been better if he had both, circumstances dictated otherwise. Molan approached the slumping figure of destruction and raised his right arm high. Crack. He grasped the body of destruction with his fingers. However, as large as it was, what Molan had grasped was merely a fraction of destruction's figure. Yet the strength contained in his hand allowed him to seize all of destruction. Crunch. His teeth shattered from being clenched too tight. Blood spurted from Molan's eyes, nose, ears and mouth. Still he did not stop. The many legs that had collapsed were forcibly torn apart by his strength. Boom. Molan finally drove the body of destruction into the ground. Molan roar, he yelled. He had expended all his strength, summoned more power than he had drawn before. Was this also a miracle? Molan raised his head, but now was not the time to look up. As he turned around, this miracle was not wrought solely by Eugene's divinity. So that's how it is, Molan said with a nod and a smile. He could not afford to fall first in a battle. It was necessary for his comrades to defeat the enemy for victory. Molan always had to remain standing even if he were caked in blood. Idiot. Every time Molan forced himself to endure, Hamel would come over and call him an idiot, tossing him behind and taking over his role. Vermouth didn't use harsh words but sometimes did the same. But after returning from the Devildom, Molan could no longer afford to fall. The harsh, barren tundra, scant of resources from the start, was left with truly nothing after the war. Molan had to rebuild his tribe in the tundra as both a chieftain and a hero. As he became a king. For all his subjects who revered him, he could not afford to collapse, and the same had been true in Lahanjar. But it was different now. It's fine, Molan murmured with a smile. Now it would be all right to fall. Molan thought this as he knelt down. Ah! One of the saints gasped. Sienna had fallen and so had Molan. Christina and Anise watched it happen as Eugene's wings. Their comrades had fallen. It was the saints' role to prevent such occurrences, but in this battle they could not afford to. They were wholly supporting Eugene's power. Sister Sir Eugene, I. Christina's voice was heavy with labored breaths and interspersed with sobs. She whispered while pushing against Eugene's back. I believe that today this holy war will end as everyone's victory. Yes, Anise replied in the same tone. She smiled brightly. She supported Christina with one arm while reaching out with the other to Vermouth. I can hear them. Different murmurs, yet their prayers were not dissimilar. The saints heard the world's prayers for victory, filled with worshipful hymns. The flames grew fiercer and there was light. Eugene's gaze headed towards Vermouth and Vermouth returned the gaze. Destruction could no longer stand with its legs shattered. but the multitude of arms and heads on its back continued attacking Eugene and Vermouth in unison. The voices could be heard. A warm light was pushing against their backs. Despite the flames being so intense, the light was not burning hot but warm as it connected to Vermouth. It was a stark contrast to the excruciating pain he felt when wielding the holy sword in the past. What Vermouth felt was the complete form of divinity. The power that once felt distant, the movements once uncatchable, were now perfectly aligned with him. Like countless times before, both of their swords moved in unison and met the enemy's attacks seamlessly. "Do you see?" The unified voice of the saints whispered to Vermouth. Vermouth found himself turning back. He saw the light he had seen within destruction, and he heard the voice that had kept him from forgetting himself amidst the swirling turmoil. The radiant Eugene. The great Vermouth. They had never met. Yet he knew them. They were the descendants born from Vermouth, the lineage created solely for Hamel. The Lionhearts were now shouting the names of Eugene and Vermouth together. Despite centuries passing, their characteristics had not altered: ash-gray hair and golden eyes. Most importantly, they held the lion emblem on their left chest. A woman swinging her blood-soaked arms could be seen, as well as a man yelling and swinging his swords behind her. They were followed by knights. The girl who had been given the demonies was shedding bloody tears while her older brother supported her and led the young knights. Vermouth had ignored and even marginalized the collateral branches. It was natural to think they would hold grudges, but even they were now joining in, shouting their ancestors' name. "Everyone," the saints said. It was not only the Lionhearts. A man with the emblem of Kiel unleashed a massive wave of sword force. There were also knights and warriors carrying the emblems of other kingdoms and holding the flags of their mercenary bands. There were also the indigenous people of the Great Forest, those who had previously been massacred to set an example on Ukla's mountain. Their young chieftain stood before destruction with countless corpses behind him. Even the wizards who should have been at the rear were fearlessly fighting at the front. The great spirit summoner screamed as the colors of destruction continued spreading, but she did not retreat but instead continued flailing her arms toward destruction. Despite having no more summoned creatures to command, the arch-wizard in red did not retreat but led other wizards of different colors. Above, a young dragon not yet fully matured was breathing fire, carrying both wizards and priests on its back. The saints continued. Despite continuing to pour out from destruction, the Nur could not advance into the world. There was a noble cause to stop destruction in its tracks, and the army gathered under this banner was now blocking the path of the Nur. "Ah," Vermouth gasped as he looked further afield. He saw the end of the world. He had left it to Molan to defend. The white, snowy mountain was now stained red. The Nur continued to pour out from there, though it was a pitifully small force compared to the place where the demon king of destruction descended. But the Nur couldn't come down the mountain. Countless had died, their blood staining the snow red, yet Molan's descendants did not despair and led their troops. Knights and mercenaries with sun-scorched skin, more suited to the sea than snowy fields, blocked the Nur just the same. "Sir Vermouth, these are your descendants," the saints affirmed. 300 years ago the world should have perished. All beings would have died and the demon king of incarceration would have moved on to the next era, starting anew in an empty world. But the world did not end then because Vermouth had made a pact with the demon king of incarceration, sacrificing himself to reseal the demon king of destruction. They had obtained that reprieve 300 years ago. "No, Sir Vermouth," Christina said, shaking her head in denial. "It wasn't just a reprieve." Vermouth looked up at Christina. The young saint, resembling a niece, prayed to Vermouth as a representative of the generations born 300 years later. "Sir Vermouth, you opened the future for the world," she stated. "Without Vermouth, nothing in the current world would exist." "Is that so?" Vermouth nodded with a faint smile. "I was truly the great Vermouth. The world truly considered me," Vermouth choked as he said. He did not wipe the tears that streamed down his cheeks. Vermouth turned his head with a smile. "Considered me the hero," he said, smiling even more broadly. Dozens of gaping maws appeared. Vermouth swung first with the chained sword he had received from the demon king of incarceration. After cutting off all of destruction's heads with that sword, Vermouth laid it down. Then he picked up another sword. The new sword he now held was not the one from the demon king of incarceration. There was a relentless calling. the light gently pushing his back as well as the light seeping from deep within. Vermouth himself transformed into his sword. Hamel, he called out. This was the sword of the hero responsible for saving the world 300 years ago, the one responsible for opening the future. The hero paved the way. Eugene Lionheart, Vermouth called. At the end of the path he paved, Vermouth pushed Eugene forward. Now it's your turn. Chapter 6:12. Vermouth Lionheart 4. Bonus images. Eugene felt a hand gently pushing his back. As he moved forward he turned to look behind. There were Christina and Anise, acting as his wings to keep him from falling and supporting him steadfastly. He saw Vermouth, who smiled brightly like a blazing flame. But that wasn't all. Though Molen lay fallen below after grappling with destruction, Eugene could feel Molen right behind him. He could sense Sienna, though she had collapsed far away. He thought of everyone present as he listened to the voices calling out. He felt those who were blocking destruction, the very essence of calamity. He felt the collective will to prevent the world from total destruction. Now it's your turn. freewebnovel.com. Vermouth's words reached him. There was no need to question what he meant. Eugene understood Vermouth's words the moment he heard them. Vermouth had saved the world 300 years ago, and now it was Eugene's turn. Everything that had transpired until now had been leading to the moment when Eugene Lionheart would take over. Agaroth had wounded destruction before dying. And because Agaroth had held destruction, the sage became the world tree, and the god of giants and the ancient gods became the light. Thus, a world different from all past worlds began. Vermouth was born from destruction's scar and gathered his comrades, and although they were ultimately defeated, it wasn't a complete failure. The 300 years he bought weren't meaningless. The world had evolved sufficiently and had united to stop its own destruction. And thus it was now Eugene's turn. I know, answered Eugene. He no longer looked back. He didn't need to see the feel of many hands pushing his back. He no longer needed to strain his ears. The many prayers had already transformed into a massive will and filled him from within. Destruction raised its head to see Eugene. Despite being cut down over and over, it still had dozens of heads and hundreds of arms. With a whoosh, hundreds of arms shot out toward Eugene. Eugene's eyes emitted a golden light. Each of the flailing arms carried enough power to annihilate life. Destruction blocked the path of Eugene, the hero who carried the world's will. Eugene bit his lip and grasped the divine sword. No, Eugene said with firm conviction. In the distant past, Agaroth had knelt before destruction. 300 years ago, Hamel had felt despair from afar at the sight of destruction. Even a week ago, Eugene had felt terror in the face of destruction. But that wasn't the case anymore. You can't stop me, he declared. All of that was just in the past. Agaroth, Hamel, Eugene, and even destruction itself had not vanished but persisted until this very moment. But destruction, which had swallowed the world numerous times, could not conquer this moment. Eugene was absolutely sure of that, and his determination and certainty fueled the divine fire even more. Whoosh! A single strike incinerated half of destruction's arms. Destruction writhed while emitting a terrible scream. Its instinct was to retreat, but it couldn't. The magic left by Sienna prevented destruction from standing on its legs. Molen's hand still held on to destruction. The attacks on destruction's true form from the outside penetrated deep, causing a similar resonance inside the heart. The great will of the world, given birth by all the prayers, made destruction cease to be destruction. You, said Eugene while gasping for breath. He gripped the divine sword with both hands. Eugene's internal universe, forced into overdrive by ignition, placed a tremendous burden on him. But if it were necessary, he would use ignition over and over without much thought. He possessed the resolve and the will to do so. What do you have? Eugene asked the monster. Rumbly. The remaining hands of destruction moved towards Eugene once again, but they were incinerated to mere ash by the flames of the divine sword. Destruction rallied up for another attack and dozens of jaws opened wide. It was the same attack that had destroyed Eugene's leg and Molen's arm. Sienna was no longer here to block the attack. She had fallen. However, her will had passed on to Eugene. The burst of light couldn't even get close to Eugene before being blocked by a barrier. You have nothing, Eugene declared. Everyone was born with the will to accomplish and attain something. Such will, united in thought, transformed into conviction. Even the specter, despite being born of falsehood and lies, died with conviction. Even the demon king of incarceration had his convictions, though he had persisted through multiple worlds. But did the demon king of destruction have anything similar? Did destruction have such conviction? The answer was no. Destruction was a monster born without any will. It did not strive to destroy the world because it had any convictions. Rather, it simply destroyed worlds because they existed and continued to wreak havoc and destruction because it could not destroy itself. "There's no way that something like you," said Eugene. Even though Vermouth was born of the demon king of destruction, he possessed the will to save the world. The demon king of destruction couldn't fully consume Vermouth. Destruction lacked resolve or will. It was a monster driven only by the simple, obvious instinct of filling its stomach due to hunger. Eugene came to realize the true nature of destruction. This existence wasn't a grand entity deserving of the moniker Demon King of Destruction. "Can stop me," continued Eugene. "It was a monster born from vile jealousy and narrow-minded desire. It may have aimed to become a demon king initially, but it had instead become a monster swallowed by its own uncontrollable power. It was a calamity that had coincidentally grown uncontrollably large as the world was reborn repeatedly." "Can stop us," said Eugene. "It had always failed. It tried to become a demon king as it desired but never did. Driven by hunger, it tried to destroy the world but couldn't even do it properly. It tried to absorb Vermouth after he split from it, but it failed even then. And now it was trying to kill Eugene. But that too would fail. "There's no way you can stop us," Eugene declared. He raised the divine sword high. He didn't refer only to himself. He had gotten this far because it had been us rather than me. Therefore the divine sword Eugene held was not solely his own. It was imbued with the will of all those who had fallen, those who had not fallen, and those who, in this very moment, denied destruction. Dozens of heads meant nothing. So instead the heads merged into one to struggle in vain. The gaping maw seemed capable of swallowing the world whole. It looked like a pitch-black abyss. But to Eugene that pitch-black abyss seemed thin, almost transparent. That vast maw felt utterly useless, incapable of swallowing anything. It looked to be a mere pretense. Even an abyss that seemed endlessly deep was shallow compared to the current Eugene. And compared to that, what of the divine sword Eugene held? It was as bright as the whole world and as vast as the sun. His opponent, that grotesque thing, could never block the divine sword. Eugene was certain, and with that conviction he swung down with the divine sword. The enormous head of destruction was split almost too easily. But despite cutting through the head of destruction, the power of the divine sword did not diminish at all. The severed head disintegrated into dark power and various colors before scattering in all directions. Eugene leaned forward with the divine sword and advanced. "For salvation," Anise whispered. Whoosh. From the dissipating wings, Anise pushed Eugene's back. The word salvation had been a constant on her lips for 300 years. Although she once resented the light and despised her own existence, Anise had truly become the saint and yearned for salvation after heading towards the Devildom during the era of war. They were closer to salvation than ever before. Anise smiled brightly as she watched Eugene's back. The one who remained by Eugene's side until the very end was none other than Christina, who had attained salvation purely through Eugene's existence. But even she found it hard to endure any longer. However, there was no sadness or lingering regret. Christina knew what would be decided shortly thereafter. For victory, Christina prayed for victory as the saint. Always. She prayed to her God who had always triumphed. Just as the fate of being the saint had given her a future, so too would the hero, the God, give the world its future. Believing in this, Christina pushed Eugene's back. Though he had no wings left, he did not fall. Amidst the thick riot of dark power and colors, Eugene moved forward as if he were carried by the wind. The monster had lost everything and could no longer create more heads. Only its hideously twitching body remained. Eugene knew exactly where to strike. Despite taking damage, the heart was still intermittently throbbing and continuing to emit dark power. It was insignificant. Why had he ever feared something that only lived without conviction or purpose? Why did he shiver in madness whenever he saw it, feeling it ominous? Eugene chuckled as he raised the divine sword. The sword swept downward and cleaved through both the dark power and swirl of color. The twitching body of the monster offered no resistance to the divine sword. The heart was no different. The divine fire first devoured the heart. As if in its final throes, destruction expelled all of its remaining dark power and colors, but nothing could pierce through the divine flames and escape. Within the layers of burning flames, both dark power and the swirling colors were extinguished. And then the divine sword split the heart. Whoosh! A great burst of flames erupted at the moment the sword cleaved the heart. Eugene did not retreat but jumped into the flames. Though he thought it unnecessary, he wanted to witness the end with certainty. The disaster that bore the ill-fitting name of Demon King of Destruction faded away. As the heart turned to ash, the enormous body also became ash. Eugene watched everything from the center. He could no longer hear the throbbing. Nor were there any screams. Instead, a different sound grew louder. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of beating originating from the outside. Eugene, who had been standing quietly watching the demise of destruction, slowly turned around. There was nothing more to see. Until the very last of the last, this entity was nothing at all. It left no last words and no will. An existence devoid of meaning would face an end that was just as empty. It had to be this way. The only part of it that wasn't void no longer existed within it. Eugene emerged from the dispersing flames and first helped up Molen, who was kneeling nearby with his head bowed. He then lifted Christina onto his shoulder from the ground. "Are you all alive?" Eugene asked. It was a rhetorical question, but he still asked it with a wry smile. However, he wasn't greeted with any answers. Molen, Christina, and even a niece who dwelled within her had all lost consciousness. "Looks like they've all passed out. This isn't going to look good once we get out," Eugene said with a sigh. He shook his head and reached out his hand. The unconscious Sienna, who had collapsed a distance away, was moved closer to Eugene. After ensuring all his companions were accounted for, he asked, "Isn't that right?" He directed the question to Vermouth, who had not lost consciousness. Vermouth did not respond. The heart of destruction had burned to ash. With that, the Demon King of Destruction was dead. Its true form still remained outside, but it too would soon perish, along with the endless waves of the Nur. Vermouth could feel all of it. He felt that he too would soon, similarly perish. The heart of destruction, now turned to ash, had ultimately been Vermouth's heart as well. "Hamel," Vermouth finally spoke. It felt as if his chest had been hollowed out. There was nothing left where his heart should be. His end was near, but Vermouth felt content. He had achieved what he had always longed for. He had killed the Demon King of Destruction. He had ended the cycle of destruction. "Thank you," Vermouth said with a faint smile. He had wished to die this way. There could be no happier death than this. At the very end, he was able to fight alongside his comrades. The world had shown him that the life he lived as Vermouth Lionheart was not meaningless. Despite his many denials of being the hero, everyone had indeed regarded him as one. "Because of you, because everyone was here, in the end I was able to die as a human, as the hero," said Vermouth. Eugene did not respond but moved closer to Vermouth. He carefully laid down Molen and then Sienna and Christina in turn. "It's a pity I can't talk more with them, but it can't be helped. I no longer have much time left," Vermouth continued. "I thought I already told you," Eugene interrupted. He squinted his eyes as he glared at Vermouth. "We said we would save you. That has been fulfilled." "I have been saved by everyone," responded Vermouth. "You also said we deserve to be happy," Eugene said. "Could there be any greater happiness than this?" Vermouth asked with a bitter smile. "I have achieved everything I wanted. I was able to fight alongside you all, and I defeated the Demon King of Destruction. I was recognized by the world. So, what good is it if you're dead?" Eugene interjected. He plopped down in front of Vermouth. Rumble. The void was trembling. The space itself looked like it was about to disappear as the Demon King of Destruction had died. Yet Eugene had disregarded such matters. He fixed his gaze directly on Vermouth's face. "Don't try to leave your last will as if it's all over. You're not finished yet, and neither are we." "You always insisted on the impossible," Vermouth replied after a pause. Though meant as a reproach, Eugene found gratitude in those words. Yet this time it truly seemed impossible. Vermouth looked down at his body, which was slowly turning to ash, a faint smile gracing his lips. "What use is it if I die? Yes, that might be the case for you since you already died once and had many regrets. But I have no regrets left," Vermouth declared. Is that really true? Eugene asked while tilting his head. You ask such mischievous questions, Vermouth responded. With a deep sigh, Vermouth lifted his head, gazing briefly at the crumbling void before continuing. It's impossible not to have regrets. No matter how much I wish to be detached, they linger. And these regrets are? Eugene probed. To see with my own eyes the world that existed because of me, answered Vermouth. He hadn't wanted to say it out loud. Just voicing it strengthened his attachment to life. The regret of not being able to continue with his comrades weighed heavily on him. Vermouth continued, I want to hear the voices that call my name. And... He paused. And what? Eugene prompted him. His cheek had twitched. It could have been a forced smile to shake off the sadness. He thought such teasing even at the last moment was typical of Hamel. Unnecessary, really. Did he truly need to act that way? Vermouth truly wondered. At least he had mourned Hamel at the moment of his death. I want to try the things we talked about in the past in the Devildom. Traveling peacefully, visiting the hot springs in the snowy mountains, continued Vermouth. Those are things you can't do if you're dead, said Eugene. That's true, Vermouth agreed. As much as he had avoided it, he had ended up saying it. I don't want to die. Eugene had wanted to hear those words. So that's it, Eugene said, grinning as he suddenly reached out and grasped Vermouth's right hand. That statement hadn't been meant for Vermouth. Vermouth jumped in surprise and looked down at his hand. An old chain had suddenly been gripped in it. It was a contract. A voice came from behind them. I had asked you, Vermouth Lionheart. The clanking of chains sounded. I asked you if you still wished to die with destruction. Vermouth turned around in surprise. The demon king of incarceration, unseen until now, was walking towards them. He had held back destruction for days after being defeated by Eugene and his comrades. This had left the demon king of incarceration too weary to stand properly, but now he seemed less exhausted. He walked by himself. Although there was no cloak of chains behind him, the demon king of incarceration held a chain in his hand. You answered no. You said you wished to destroy destruction with everyone. The demon king of incarceration whispered in a low voice with a smile. I asked you what you needed, he continued. He slowly pulled on the chain. It was connected to the chain held by Vermouth. You answered a sword and I gave you one. Vermouth no longer had a heart in his body. His body had died with destruction and was disintegrating. Like a god, a demon king fulfills wishes if there's a price to be paid, declared incarceration. There was only one thing a demon king desired. The soul. The body you were born into as a clone dies with the demon king of destruction. But the hero, as the world spoke of, the soul of Vermouth Lionheart, whom you decided is different. As the price of the contract, I, the demon king of incarceration, will have it. This contract depended on Vermouth's will. If Vermouth had thought of himself only as an avatar of destruction to the end, and if he had wished to die with the demon king of destruction, then Vermouth's soul would not have been completely independent. The chains of the contract would never have bound it. But now, the chains of the contract weren't tied to the avatar of destruction but to the soul of Vermouth Lionheart. If you do not wish to die, then live. Eugene pushed the disintegrating heart of Vermouth with a smile. We agreed to go back together,